Hello. So I made a video talking about the different types of support, and I figured I'd do one for ADC as well. Basically, what makes an ADC different from just simply dealing damage, because that's what they all do, but they all do things, they offer different things and should be picked for different reasons. So I want to start with hyper carries because they're different than just a regular carry. When you think of a carry in League, you probably think of the champion that carries the game. And how do they do that? Well, it's usually through killing the enemy or dealing massive amounts of damage, one way or another, because you usually have to chew through some enemy champions to win the game. With a hyper carry, they have the ability to do that, but to a greater extent. But they have the price to pay, which is usually going to be their early game. So, if you're fighting as, let's say you're playing Jinx Nautilus compared to playing Draven Nautilus. With Jinx Nautilus, every time Nautilus lands a hook, you're not going to be guaranteed to get a kill. Whereas with Draven, almost every single time Nautilus lands a hook, you're probably going to get a kill. Draven can pump out more damage than Jinx can later in the game. But let's say Jinx into the late game, if Jinx has a Lulu behind her too, things like that, then it becomes very, very oppressive. She's able to outrange the enemy, out DPS them. The scaling just starts to take over, and it's very, very hard for the enemy to deal with. It's kind of a shame that all the hyper carries are pretty similar in themes, or at least, I don't know, there could be a little bit more diversity in terms of why they hyper carry. So with Aphelios, like, he has the condition of the enemy coming into him. And then Kog'Maw and Twitch have the ability to output massive DPS from usually very, very far away. But then there's a champion like Soraka, where she doesn't carry through her damage, obviously. She's carrying through healing her allies. And that's an entirely different thing. So whenever you think about a hyper carry, really the common thing is the ability to have like an unbearing amount of either damage or healing, I suppose. So that's really the thing with these. But whenever you're playing them, or if you're playing with them, then you have to really, the game can like kind of morph around them in a way. If the support isn't playing the lane right with the Jinx ADC, not only does that like doom the lane, but it dooms the Jinx's ability to scale. If you doom the ability to scale, the champion doesn't scale and the champion doesn't do anything. Compare that to the support ruining the lane for a Caitlyn, for example. Everything's going to keep kind of going fine. The Caitlyn can still do things on their own, whereas the hyper carries are very, very, very dependent on things happening normally, which when's the last time that things happen normally in solo queue? Not to say that they don't, but more often than not, the variance is not going to be in your favor, at least in solo queue. So that part about them sucks. But what I don't get, at least with higher levels of play, why they're not exploited more, but then yeah, I kind of do, because support players are still very, very, what would you say, basic in the way that they play. They're either a player that sits back and does nothing, and for some reason that's a play style, and then, or they're a player that picks an engaged champion and flashes on the enemy on cooldown. That's kind of where we're at right now. With control champions, usually this means that they stop the enemy from doing something that they want to do, or have something over the enemy at certain stages of the game, and then they can kind of leverage that in one way or another. With a champion like Ashe, she doesn't have to output as much damage so long that she lands an ulti. She has her E to spot out the enemy jungler that can stop an enemy jungler from being able to get a cheese gank off, or things like that. And then with a champion like Caitlyn, it's a very, very good example of a control champion. And I would hope that a lot of people have this perspective of playing with or against a Caitlyn, especially a good one, because with a champion like Caitlyn, she has this overbearing amount of control over the lane that the enemy can't compete with usually. Obviously the matchups change, but she has the ability to push the wave. That's a control aspect with her Q. She has the ability to basically free hit minions because of her range. She has the ability to trade 1-for-0 autos because of her range. She has the ability to hit the turret because of her range. So she has her range, she has her traps to control zones, not only in the lane, but whenever her allies CC a target, or whenever they're trying to fight for, the enemy's trying to fight for an objective, they have to deal with these traps. And, it controls the enemy, makes them do things differently. And more often than not, that's going to make things very hard for the enemy to play against. And And then there's champions like Ziggs and Xerath. They're kind of similar to the Caitlyn and Ashe. They abuse high range, and that's most of the aspect that they bring. But they also deal magic damage, so that can kind of play into the control aspect as well. You know, you can control a draft if you could plug a Xerath and Ziggs into the bot lane as your AP damage instead of having AP elsewhere on the map. And then also with their high range, it's like, do you need any more control if the enemy can't reach you and they can't damage you, and you can reach them and damage them? It's just unfair at that point. Easier said than done in terms of execution. So yeah, that's most of what I have to say about control champions. It's just making it so that they shift the way that the enemy has to play things. I felt stupid categorizing these ADCs into this, just damage. It seems like, I don't know, blunt, but I think it's the best way to put it. These champions primarily just excel at dealing damage and have the ability to do that one way or another. Draven's the best example I can think of this, just an overbearing amount of damage. I suppose another way to look at them also is that they don't have these other things. They don't have utility, they don't have control, they're not a hyper carry, so they make up for that in their ability to deal damage, and that's usually spiking in the mid game with these champions. That's why they're not a hyper carry, for example. So that gives you a lot of leniency in playing them, and that's probably why these champions are the most popular. Champions like Kai'Sa, Lucian, Samira, very popular, regardless of like the skill level of play, because they're much easier to play in League of Legends single player. You know, they're much easier because usually they have a mobility ability. Jesus, they have a dash. In Kai'Sa and Draven's case, they have a movement speed boost, and that really goes a long way in terms of like being able to compensate for errors that are happening on your team or on the enemy team, right? If you have to run away, you have the dash or the movement speed to get closer. If you get in there because the enemy sucks, then you have the ability to punish them with that dash. So yeah, you have a whole lot of good variance in solo queue with these champions. But when you get to higher levels of play, and especially like if the game was just, if a perfect AI played League of Legends, right? Eventually, I would think that the damage values from these champions wouldn't really be able to do it, or at least in higher levels of play, right? Let's just look at it very realistically. At higher levels of play, the champions can't achieve what they need to, and if they don't, kind of like a champion like LeBlanc mid lane, if they don't get a lead, then they kind of can fall apart. A very easy example of this in the bot lane would be like a Samira or a Tristana or Kalista. Kalista is actually the easiest one. If she doesn't get 3 kills in lane, champion, why would we pick Kalista instead of a great assortment of other guys we got here? And another thing with these champions too is that they usually have the ability to dish out damage in certain ways. So with Draven, he has auto attacks that you simply can't beat. They're stronger than other champions' auto attacks. So if the enemy trades autos with you, you're winning. It's as simple as that. With Karthus, he has the ability to output so much damage with his Qs and then ulti 5 targets. Syndra. Another thing with these champions too also is that they need to get to these power spikes, and then once they're at them, they need to capitalize on them. So like a level 11 Syndra is going to be a lot stronger than a level 10 Syndra, for example. So yeah, that's out with the damage ADCs. I think a lot of players would have really a good amount of perspective on these compared to champions like control champions, or even the hyper carry champions, because these are way higher level of play compared to the damage champions. Okie doke. And then for the last tier is utility. It's kind of hard to define the utility compared to the control. I think the control is to stop the enemy from doing something that they want to do. And then utility is kind of giving something to your team in a way. Ezreal is a weird example of this because more often than not, Ezreal has the ability to play safer in lanes or be picked into more just stronger enemy lanes, but be able to farm it out fine. And then through doing that, he usually gains advantage because, like we covered with the damage champions, if they're not getting a lead, then they're usually paying the price for it. And Ezreal can do that. And then with a champion like Misfortune, it's very similar. She can endure going down CS. She can build different build paths and then function in different ways. She offers utility in that way. Sivir is like gives her team movement speed and then also can control the lane in a different way. And then Seraphine, very, very easy example. So much utility added for your allies, not necessarily for yourself. through the Champions kit. And then with Swain, this champion sucks. I love Swain with all my heart, but he kind of sucks. But has the utility in being able to tank a whole lot of the enemy's damage. You got to pick Swain into like 4 enemy tanks and no carries or something. That's when this guy would shine. I love you, Swain, but get stronger, man. Get some durability. Champion like Xayah doesn't need her support to peel for because she can press R. This reduces a whole lot of variance for your Thresh flaying the Alistar off you. Oops, missed my flay for the 40th time. My bad. I guess I die. It's whatever. And then there's Cho'Gath. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you have any feedback for me on a video like this, I'd appreciate it as well. So yeah, thanks for watching. I would hope that you would leave a like if you got this far, and yeah, subscribe for more League of Legends content. See you guys in Season 12. Bye-bye.